Good morning. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Susan, for this invitation. Thank you all for coming on such a beautiful Sunday morning. And I hope your Easter was everything you wanted it to be. Today, I'll share with you the story of a Muslim in New York through the lens of my story, an immigrant Muslim. The first wave of Muslims came to the United States around the turn of the 20th century, and they settled in the Michigan area. The second wave came in the 1960s and 70s. Two things had happened at that time that resulted in this immigration and this migration, and my husband and I were part of that. One was the Medicare, Medicaid had just been approved, and as a result, hospitals proliferated all over the US, especially nonprofit hospitals, and as a result, there was a need for doctors. The second was the Vietnam War. Doctors were being drafted that added to the dearth of physicians. So the US looked outside overseas to recruit physicians. And India and Pakistan were a fertile ground because they spoke English. This had been a British colony, and their education and medium of instruction was in English. And as a result, my husband was offered a contract to do his residency in Washington, D.C. without so much as an interview. All he had to do was pass an exam, which he went to the US Information Services Library and took the exam there, a medical exam and an English proficiency exam. With that and his degree, he was offered a job. Someone with a brown skin from Pakistan, wherever that was, with English as a second language, a name that one could barely pronounce, Khalid Rahman. Can you say Khalid Rahman? Khalid Rahman. And obviously a Muslim. No background checks, no extreme vetting. They respected his credentials. So Christian, so American. He came in 1969. 2 years later, in 1971, when I was living in Pakistan, I had a hurried arranged marriage and flew into the sunset with my husband and came to New York. The first time I met my husband was a week before we were married, and the first time I spoke to him was on my wedding night. It was love at first night. I flew into JFK on a cold, wintry, blustery, snowy, bleak December morning, and life never looked so bright. I was in love. Culture shock. The first night in our apartment, my husband took me for a loop. He made dinner. Now, in Pakistan, the kitchen is a no man's land. I don't think my father ever held a potato. And as I watched my Prince Charming peel away the layers of the onion, I just fell in love all over again. The next morning, I had written some letters to my parents to let them know that I have arrived safely, because this ET couldn't phone home, because in those days you had to call the overseas operator, book a call. It would take a month before you could get it. Anyhow, so I wrote some letters. He gave me some cash. He had to go to work, and said that you can mail these at the post office. Just go down the street, make a right, make another left, go around the block, and behind that building is the post office. You cannot miss it. Okay. So I got dressed. I wore my shimmering finery, put on all my jewelry, my gold choker, my golden bangles, my dangling gold earrings, my gold pumps, my golden pocketbook, and I walk out into the streets of Jamaica, Queens. 1971. I go to the post office, and now I can't make change. I'm looking at these coins, and he's saying, give me the nickel, give me the dime, and I can't figure out why a 5-cent coin is larger than a 10-cent coin. I walk out into the streets, and I am shocked at the poverty in America. People are walking around in tattered jeans with gaping holes. I walk into a pharmacy, and this nice old gentleman with round glasses says to me, you must be new. How did you know? That young lady, I wouldn't be walking the streets of New York dressed the way you are. Why not? You're going to get mugged. I don't know if I ran home in shoes that were not meant for running, and when my husband came home in the evening, I said, why didn't you tell me? I didn't know you'd get all dressed up in your jewelry. I said, but brides in Pakistan get dressed up in their jewelry and walk the streets all the time. He said, well, guess what, honey? Anyhow, a few days later, I ran into my neighbors, and they said to me, where are you from? Pakistan. Where is that? Oh my goodness, they don't know where Pakistan is? I couldn't reconcile ignorance with progress. I mean, we were little kids, and we used to play this game called Capitals of the World. I had a map of the world on my bedroom wall. We knew where everything was. We had studied geography. So I was a little surprised. Then I go to the Christmas party of my husband's hospital, and I look around, and all the resident physicians are men. So I ask him, where are the lady doctors? Now, that's what we would call them in Pakistan, lady doctors. He said, oh, we don't have any. I said, what do you mean you don't have any? He said, well, you know, women don't go into this profession over here. Now, I'm talking 1971. Again, I couldn't reconcile that. This is such an advanced country, and women don't go into the medical profession. In Pakistan, we had a medical school just for women. It was an all-women medical school. And in the co-ed medical schools, there was a quota of seats just for women. Now, of course, I rationalized it later that that's because there's segregation of the sexes over there, and a woman would like to be examined only by a female physician. Likewise, teachers, you know, you had all girls' schools, you had all boys' schools, so teachers had to be women. And as a consequence of that culture, you had to have women doctors. But interestingly, most of them went into the specialty of OBGYN and pediatrics. I mean, God forbid if a woman became a urologist. I mean, I don't know. Then I went to visit a Pakistani friend of ours, and his girlfriend was there, very American. And when we left, Khalid said to her, are you staying or are you leaving? She said, I'm staying. So I come home and I ask my husband, I said, so where is she going to sleep, like on the couch? He said, no. And I said, oh my God, men and women sleeping together out of wedlock, oh my goodness. I thought that happened only in the movies. So I was dealing with all this culture shock. Now we go to visit a friend of ours, and we have to call and make an appointment. We can't just drop in. Now in Pakistan, you got dressed up. First thing in the morning, you got dressed up in case somebody came visiting. So all this culture shock I had to deal with, but most of all, what I had a hard time with was that I was lonely. I had no family. I had no friends. My husband was working nights every other night. He would go in the morning, come home the next day in the evening, and then back again, same cycle. So that was hard. Eventually, I fell into the role of a homemaker, had two beautiful boys, and I drifted away from the faith. Not because I was busy, which I was, but because the environment wasn't there. I didn't hear the call to the prayer because there were no mosques. I didn't have a Muslim community. There were no Muslims. Ramadan came and went, the month of fasting, and the communal spirit that accompanies the breaking of the fast every evening was not there. So I stopped fasting. I stopped saying my prayers because every time I would try to say my prayer, I needed somebody to watch the boys. And if I took a risk and I would go down in prostration, little toddler would come and sit on my head. So I had to fold away my prayer rug. It was only when my children started growing up that I and mothers like me and fathers like my husband began to wake up to the fact that we need to do something to make sure that they can retain their religious identity. But I also had a dilemma. To what extent do we integrate without diluting and compromising one's heritage? So if Eid, which is the holiday after the end of Ramadan, falls on a weekend, and it's a big holiday, do the children take the day off from school? What does my husband do? He may have patients booked. And what about me? I may have a board meeting to go to. I had become a professional by then. Will my children have an arranged marriage like mommy? And do I get them a Christmas tree? So needless to say, we all become religious when it's time for the holidays. So at Christmas time, I would watch my children look in awe at, the beauty and sparkle of Christmas, the charitable feelings that were engendered at that time of the season, the brightly wrapped gifts, the ringing of the Santa Claus ringing the bells, and the city as decked as a Pakistani bride. And we would say, oh my God, they're going to feel that they are missing out on something. What do we do? So someone then told me that make a big deal out for your holiday. And we said, okay, we will Christmasize Eid. Give it a makeover. So we put up, when it was Eid day, we put up lights inside the house, outside the house. Instead of giving cash gifts, which was a Pakistani tradition, we bought brightly wrapped, colorful packages of gifts for the children. We got all dressed up traditional. We had a potluck party. By that time, we had a critical mass of Muslims. Three families. 3 families. And we kept that tradition going, thinking that our children will never miss Christmas. But then I talk about this story in my book. One morning, my little boy woke up crying on Christmas Day. And when I said, asked him, what is it? I wish we had a Christmas tree. I regret that. I regret that I didn't get them a Christmas tree. I was insecure. And most immigrants like me, when they first come here, deal with the same insecurities. If we cross this line, will we be really crossing a line? And we have to deal with that. We also had to make some of our celebrations and holidays easier and Americanized. For example, 2 months after the end of Ramadan is the festival of Eid al-Adha, and that commemorates Abraham's sacrifice. So in Pakistan, what we would do, and this is done in all Muslim countries, is that on that day of the festival, a month prior, you bring a goat to the house, you tie it in the backyard under a tree, you feed it, you pamper it, you love it, and on the day of the festival, the butcher will come to the house and the meat is prepared, and it's divided into 3 sections. One is given to the poor, and they start lining up outside the house on the day of the festival. One is given to family and friends, and the third you keep for yourself. Now try doing that in the United States. I didn't have a goat, I didn't have a backyard, I didn't have a tree, and I didn't have a butcher. So in the beginning, we took the easy way out. I would send the money to my mother in Pakistan and say, could you please do the goat tradition, sacrifice on my behalf. But then by the time the Muslim community grew and we had a critical mass of, let's say, 50 families now, my husband came home one day with this bright idea. He's always full of ideas, and said, I figured it out. This is what we're going to do. There is now a halal butcher on Staten Island. Halal is the meat that is prepared the Muslim way. And we're going to have everybody in the community place their orders with him. He'll have the meat ready, and then we go and pick up our share. And I said, but what about the poor? The share for the poor? We have no people lining outside our homes on Staten Island. He said, I've talked to the soup kitchen, and they're going to come and they're going to pick up the meat from the store. Great idea. And I've called the press. I said, you did what? He said, I've called the press. I want people to know that Muslims are contributing to the community. So sure enough, on Eid day, after the meat was prepared, the Meals on Wheels, I think it was Project Hospitality, came, carted away 600 pounds of meat, and the Staten Island Advance ran a big story the next day in the paper. And that has continued. This was the 80s. It's still going on. Another issue we had to deal with was that we follow the lunar calendar, which means that the Muslim year is 10 days shorter than the solar year, which means that each month is either 28 days or 29 days. And how do you know that it's 28 days or 29 days? Is that you have to sight the crescent. When the crescent becomes visible on the horizon, it marks the end of the month and the start of the new month, which means Ramadan ends today and tomorrow is the holiday. Now, so for example, Ramadan will start on the 15th of May this year, I think, depends on the crescent. Next year, it will be, in 2019, it will be on the 5th. And the following year, 10 days prior. So that in 15 years, it will be in the middle of winter, and so on. So in Pakistan, what we would do, and in other Muslim countries, is on the 28th day of Ramadan, we would go out into the fields or on the rooftops to sight the moon around sundown. If we sighted the crescent, it meant that the month is over, tomorrow is Eid. The government would make an announcement that there's a holiday tomorrow, everything is closed, and the whole nation would go into celebrations. If it wasn't sighted, then you fast for another day, and then after that is the holiday. Now try doing that in New York. On the last minute, you find out that the moon has been sighted. My children have an exam the next morning. My husband has patient's book. What do? We would go down on our knees and pray that Eid fall on a weekend. Anyhow, over time, there is now, generally speaking, there is consensus amongst the Muslim scholars that it is okay to follow the astronomical calendar. I mean, if we can put a man on the moon, we can know when a crescent will be sighted, whether it's going to be this day or that day. And most of the people now are following that, but there are some who still insist on sighting the crescent. So you will have a situation where in one part of New York, you will have Eid today, and in another part, you'll have Eid the next day because they followed this astronomical calendar and they wanted to sight it by the naked eye. Thankfully, Mayor Bill de Blasio has announced when he took office that Eid would now be a public school holiday in the public school system, and he has fixed the dates. So I am on his moon. Our other issue was religious education of our children. In the 80s, there were no teachers who could teach my children. There was no Sunday school. I was ignorant. When I was a child, I had gone to a Catholic school run by nuns in habits. Some call it hijab. I started my day with the Lord's Prayer. I still remember it. Every day, when I turned 10, every day the teacher would come to the home and teach me to read the Quran in Arabic, in the language in which it was revealed. And by the time I was 11, I had read the Quran from right to left, from Alif to Ye, completed the recitation in Arabic, and with that, my religious education was considered complete. The fact that I didn't understand a word of what I was reading was considered inconsequential. So, I was ignorant. How am I going to make Muslims out of my children? I did remember, though, that my grandfather used to tell me bedtime stories. Stories of the prophets. Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Joseph, Jacob, and that's where I had gotten my grounding, my moral teaching, so to say. So I went to the bookstore, into the children's section, and I found a book called Stories from the Bible. And in it were the same stories. Adam, Abraham, Joseph, Jesus, Moses, the same stories my grandfather told me. Only Prophet Muhammad was missing, and I figured I can wing that. So bedtime stories became daytime stories. And I would sit on the sofa by the window, boys on each side, and tell them a story every day. But very soon, my husband and I realized that this wasn't enough. Just reading bedtime stories. My children needed formal schooling. They needed a community. We needed to have them in an environment where they felt secure in their identity as Muslims. So we tried to build a community. By now, of course, those 3 families had become 6 families. So we made a call one day that it's Eid tomorrow. Let's have an Eid Eve party. We'll call it the moon sighting party. And everybody come dressed up traditional, and let's have a celebration. So 3 families knew 6 families knew another 6 families, and we had a big party in the living room. Eventually they moved into basements and then into rented halls. And just by partying and socializing and hanging out together, we were able to create a sense of belonging. But that was just partying. What about religious education? A doctor bought a house and donated it to the community, saying, use it for a Sunday school. So we started congregating over there. But wait a minute, we have no teachers. Who's going to teach our children? So guess what? We became teachers. Ignorant moms and dads had to quickly educate themselves and keep themselves just 1 grade level ahead of their children. Now, I, growing up in Pakistan, didn't have to educate myself or be knowledgeable because everybody around me was Muslim. Nobody was questioning, nobody was challenging, nobody was asking questions. So I had no questions. But my children were asking questions, and I had to know the answers. We also had to walk the talk. One day, my son came home from school and said, Mommy, Ramadan starts tomorrow. Aren't you going to fast? Sure, of course we are going to fast. Honey, vacation's over, start fasting. Again, he comes home one day and says, oh, in 10 minutes it's going to be prayer time. Now, how did he know in 10 minutes it's going to be prayer time? His teacher had given him a schedule. So pull out your prayer rug and start praying. If we want our children to be observant Muslims, we have to walk the talk. We today are more knowledgeable about the faith than our parents were, and are more knowledgeable than had we stayed back in Pakistan, because they don't have the same challenges. And our children are more knowledgeable than us. Once we outgrew the space in our Sunday school, we felt the need to have a house of worship. We looked at the beautiful churches, the beautiful synagogues, and we wanted our children to feel that they also have a place that they can be proud of. There was a problem. In Islam, you're not permitted to take interest on a loan or pay interest on a loan. Now, we all were breaking that rule because we all had mortgages on our homes. But the Imam said that when it comes to a house of worship, you cannot break the rules. So it has to be a cash purchase. Now, we were all fairly well-to-do, but even our pooled resources in that small community were not enough to buy or construct a mosque. My husband went and spoke to the borough president. He said, I'll parcel out a whole piece of land for you, but it's a large tract and I cannot divide it, and we didn't have the money. So what did we do? We fundraised and we fundraised and we fundraised until people would stop looking us in the eye. And we couldn't go to the next community in the other town because they were doing their fundraising. So eventually, all we could afford was an old, beat-up, empty warehouse. We bought it, and then it sat there for another 2 years until we were able to fundraise to start constructing it and renovating and with code issues and all the approvals. And our goal was that on Eid day we will open the mosque. We'll hold the Eid prayers in our mosque. And just a month before we ran out of money. And now we had exhausted our resources. Nobody was coming forth with any more money. So my husband then wrote a letter to the Association of Pakistani Physicians of North America. This was a large organization. And we said, can you please send us $50? That's all we're asking for. And the money started coming in. I mean, it was a small ask. And people sent $50 and some sent a little more, and we were able to complete the work and open our mosque on Eid day. But something interesting was happening. We were watching mosques in other communities being, built or established, and they were all being established along ethnic lines and along lines of national origin. So you had the Pakistani Indian mosque, you had the Albanian mosque, you had the Arab mosque, you had the Turkish mosque. And the reason for that was that these were immigrants, and they wanted this to be their community center as well, where they could give the sermon in their national language of the old country, where they could dress the same way, where they could share the same food. And to this day, you will see that that most of the mosques that were built then and today are along ethnic lines. I'm hoping that in my children's generation, who are in their 40s now, that these mosques will become American mosques and they will cut across national boundaries. We noticed that once we opened the doors of our mosque, that we had people of all ethnic origin coming. Because initially this was only one of 2 mosques on Staten Island. We had the African Americans, the Pakistani Indians, the Turkish, the Malaysian, the Indonesian. Everybody was expressing the faith differently. Different in how they dressed. Some women wore the hijab, some didn't. Some wore the niqab, some didn't. Difference in their etiquettes, in their social interaction. Some men and women would shake hands, some would just go like this. Their celebrations were different. And that's when my husband said to me that this is an expression of their culture. It is culture that is driving how they practice their faith, and yet they all attribute it to the faith. They think that this is the Islamic way, but it really isn't. It is really the cultural way. Okay, so then what about our children? They are Americans. They are going to have to express Islam the American way. And how do we tease that out? How do we tell our children what is cultural and what is religious? So then we had to go back and educate ourselves, study the Quran. We studied various translations of the Quran. And we were able to figure out, this is religion, that is culture. And then you take the religion and you wrap it in an American flag, in the colors of red, white, and blue. And our children did that organically. We didn't even have to tell them that. They were studying the Quran and they were living and expressing as Americans. Very Islamic, very American. What I mean by that is that some things changed and some things did not. What hasn't changed is the creed, that there is one God, belief in one God, that we must pray to God 5 times a day to thank Him for what He's given us. We must fast during the month of Ramadan so that we know what it is like to go without food and to attain God consciousness. We must give to charity, to spread the blessings that God has given us, and if we can, once in a lifetime, perform the pilgrimage in Mecca to the house that Abraham built, the patriarch of all the three faiths. Their creed hasn't changed. Belief in the day of judgment, belief in the angels, belief in all the prophets that preceded Prophet Muhammad, belief in all the books that were revealed to the prophets, belief in the Bible, in the Torah, in the Psalms, in the Quran. What has changed is how they dress. The hijab is a cultural expression. The Quran says dress modestly, and each culture has defined what the expression or threshold of modesty is. In some cultures where I grew up, for example, women did not cover their hair, but their legs were always covered. And to this day in Pakistan, the legs are covered. At that time in the 60s, the women in the Middle East would cover their hair, but they wore knee-length skirts. And I remember a delegation from Syria or Jordan it was that came to Pakistan, and the women were together, the Pakistani and Jordanian women, and my mother and aunt said to them, "That's not Islamic the way you're dressed. Your legs are showing." And they said, "That's not Islamic the way you're dressed. Your hair are showing." So each thought that they were doing the right thing. So here our children are dressing American. How weddings are conducted has changed. In the old country, when I got married, the religious ceremony was held in private. The celebration, the partying was done in public, but when the religious ceremony was performed, I was upstairs in my bedroom with the girls, my husband was downstairs in the living room with the guys, and the cleric was running back and forth with the documents, getting consent. Here, in the Hyatt or Hilton Hotel, the bride and groom are on the stage with the cleric there, and the marriage ceremony is performed in public, which is really the Islamic way, because marriage is a public announcement. Very American, very Islamic. The women are not changing their name after marriage. I was Sabiha Akbar. I became Sabiha Rahman, not because it was the Islamic way, but because it was the British way. Pakistan was a British colony. Now women are realizing that the Quran says, call the child by his father's name. It's your lineage, it is your legacy, it is your identity. That never changes. So the women are now keeping their maiden name. The man who holds the mic has changed, or the woman I should say now. And here I mean the scholars and the imams. Initially, when we started building our mosques, there was no one credentialed to be the imam. So we would import imams from the old country. And these men did not speak the language. They did not know the local culture, and our children couldn't relate to them. And they brought their cultural baggage with them. Now we have homegrown imams. In fact, right here, Cordoba House, and Lala is a part of that training, imams or Muslim leaders are being trained to give sermons and to be what we call the muftis, the ones who are able to provide leadership to the young and to the adults. Women are now getting an education in becoming spiritual leaders. That was not the case in the old country. In these times, is still not. I never went to a mosque in Pakistan. My mother never did. None of the women ever ventured into a mosque. It was a man's thing. Now here, the women are running the mosques. They are on the board. Some of them are at the helm, have the position of president. Big, big change. Very American, very, very Muslim. Because Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said to his followers, if you want to learn about religion, learn it from my wife, Aisha. And she was the youngest, lived the longest after his death, and she related stories of the Prophet that became part of what is equivalent of the Gospels called the Hadith. And much of our knowledge about how the Prophet practiced Islam comes through her teachings. And this, being a spiritual leader, is only an extension of of that role of a woman, also the extension of her role as a mother. So very Islamic. There will be Christmas trees, there will be interfaith couples. How we give to charity has changed. As I said, I used to send money to my mother in Pakistan saying, can you please make the sacrifice? Now we have local charity organizations that we contribute to and that we support. How we give thanks has changed. In the old country, we had a reason to say thanks or express the blessings. For example, a baby is born. So we would cook a big dessert dish, divide it into portions and distribute it into the neighborhood, knock on doors saying, here's some dessert for you. We just had a baby girl or a baby boy. Or my son got accepted to medical school, whatever. Here now we have Thanksgiving, we have Mother's Day, we have Father's Day, all very Islamic. Prophet Muhammad said, if you want to go to heaven, honor your mother. The second commandment after belief in God is to honor your parents. So to me and to us, Mother's Day and Father's Day is very, very Islamic. The other crisis that we faced as our children grew up was marriage. I had an arranged marriage. We knew that our children are American, they are not going to have an arranged marriage. So as our children started entering college, we mothers would all gather and say, oh, I hope he marries a Muslim. Oh, I hope she marries a Muslim. Maybe I'll go get a boy from the old country. And so these fresh off the boat, boys and girls started coming. It didn't work. Or let me put it this way. It worked if the young girl, if it was a young girl. It didn't work if it was a young boy being imported. And I'll let you figure that one out. So very soon, it was almost like an interfaith marriage. If my daughter or son marries a locally born Muslim person, it's like an interfaith marriage. Anyhow, we got past that. Then it was where it has to be a Muslim. But it must be of the same national origin. See, women started looking around in their Pakistani circles and Arabs in their Arab circles because they wanted them to marry within that same cultural background. Now it is, well, as long as it's a Muslim. Actually, now it's fine. Interfaith marriages are fine. Our religion permits it. You are allowed to marry people of the book, meaning Christians and Jews. So we've gotten past that as well. But when my son was growing up, my mindset was it has to be a Muslim. So what did we do? Now, we didn't have dating in Pakistan, and this was another cultural way of honoring the edict that men and women should not have sex before they are married. So to prevent that from happening, you would segregate them, because if you allowed them to date, one thing would lead to another, and before you know it, you had a problem on your hands, so no dating. As I said, that was a cultural expression. Now here, what do you do? So we decided to have chaperoned gatherings. And the Association of Pakistani Physicians was one where the doctors would meet once a year for their annual conference. And we would take the whole families over there because the doctors are having their conference and the rest are socializing and the kids are playing. Then we started dragging our teenagers with us because we wanted them to socialize amongst their own. Then these teenagers became college kids, and then we started having singles events, like put them in one room under the watchful eye of the parents, while they're having their scientific sessions. So when my son was in medical school, I told him and his brother, both my boys, I said, I'm putting you on a plane and sending you to Detroit to attend the annual conference of the Pakistani physicians. So my older son, Saqib, says, why do I have to go? I said, because I want you to go find a wife for yourself. Mom! And then my younger son says, but why do I have to go? I said, because I want you to facilitate it. Now my older son is the introvert and my younger son will make a friend crossing the street. So I said, you have to make sure, little one, that he doesn't hang out with the boys. Introduce him to young girls, and when it's the time for the banquet, make sure he sits at a table where there are some pretty girls. So he did that. They sat at a table with some girls there and some young boys, and right across the table was Sadia. They struck up a conversation, exchanged emails turned into phone conversations, and a year later they were married. Now they're raising 3 children, one of whom we were babysitting for just until yesterday. So I did not arrange his marriage. I engineered it. Now with my second son, if you know Fiddler on the Roof, he decided to do it his way. And we love both our daughters-in-law. They're precious. Then there were some turning points, big turning points with a major challenge that challenged our existence. The first was 9/11. Prior to 9/11, we had been doing all this interfaith work since the 80s. We never felt discriminated. Immediately after 9/11, you all know what happened. The sound bites on TV were painful. Our faith was being challenged. Islam became synonymous with terrorism. Muslims relinquished their identity. Women removed their headscarves. Men shaved their beards, and people started changing their names. Muhammad became Mo, Jafar became Jeff. Political candidates running for office didn't want our money, and our community was at the risk of losing its soul. We met up with the challenge and realized that our in-reach now to raise good Muslims we had to change to outreach, from in-reach to outreach, and make ourselves known. And the first communities that opened their doors to us was the faith communities. They wanted to know us, we wanted to know them. We discovered during these dialogues how much we had in common and how little there was that divided us. Then came the presidential elections of 2016, and we felt at that time that our very existence in the United States was at risk. But in those moments, we felt the power of community, of the interfaith community, of all communities, and we felt the power of all that is good in America. People rallied behind us. When the travel ban was announced, I was in Foley Square offering my Friday prayers on the cold concrete with snow falling amongst a crowd of worshippers, and we were encircled by people of all faiths, Hindus, Christians, Jews, atheists, nuns. Everybody was there watching over us, making sure that we were protected. That night at JFK, there were lawyers out there on their laptops, people on the streets, cab drivers on strikes, and they pushed back. The Muslim registry, nobody talks about it now. The Muslim ban, we all know what happened with that. Organizations rallied in Times Square with placards saying, "Today I'm a Muslim." I saw a woman in a wheelchair. She must be in her 90s in Times Square. I don't know how she got there, but she came there because she wanted to make a statement. Never before have we felt so much love from so many whose names we didn't know and whose faces we had not seen. This is what is best about America. We are working to make ourselves known. And I don't mean I wear a t-shirt saying, "I am a Muslim, don't panic." But this is just one example of you inviting us into your space, giving up your Sunday to come and listen and talk and get to know one another. When bad things happen, we speak up. Interfaith dialogue is at its height like it was never before. The Sisterhood of Salam Shalom now has 150 chapters nationwide. Here in New York, my calendar alone, and this is just me, and then there are hundreds or thousands examples just here in New York. There's the Daughters of Abraham in dialogues. There's interfaith iftars. There's interfaith Christmas. There are interfaith book clubs. And at a church, when somebody asked me, how can we help you? And I said, make a Muslim friend. The pastor's wife came to me with a list of 11 dates saying, these are the families who would like to invite a Muslim into their home. Can you please arrange it? And I had to call Leila in panic and said, Leila, please, can we arrange it? Can we find 11 Muslim families who are available on these dates to go and have a meal in the Christian homes? And then we ended up reciprocating. So just a few examples. But the thing that really, at a very personal level, changed our life was when my grandson was detained at the airport. Umar was 8, getting on a plane to go to Disney World. He got detained because Umar Rahman is the same name as a terrorist on the no-fly list. The authorities said, we know it's not him, but we have our rules and we have to have him cleared through the system before we can let you get on a plane. Umar has autism. He and his parents and his sister were holed up in detention. Of course, they missed their flight. He got hungry. Mom said, can I step out and go get him some food? They said, you're in holding. You can't go out. He started stimming, and there was nothing we could do. I called the press, I called New York Times, I called Huffington Post, I called the Age of Autism, I called my assemblyman. He was in New York, the airport was in Philadelphia. Eventually, they came back and said, we've done a match. The terrorist is in his 20s. No match. You can go. Duh. And that's when my husband said that, I've been telling you for 20 years, you've got to write a book. Do it now. Because it's not enough that we are doing interfaith dialogue in our comfort zones. We have to tell our stories and make our voices heard all across America. So you need to write this book. So I listened. And I wrote Threading My Prayer Rug because I want the reader to know that the heart and soul of a Muslim mother is like that of any other. That Islam does not advocate violence. Misguided people do. That Islam does not oppress women. Misguided people do. That we have the same dreams. My son, the doctor. We have the same fears. I hope it's not cancer. We have the same worries. Can I pay my bills? I want the reader to know that the Islamic values are entirely compatible with the American values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I do that by taking you into my home, having you sit at my kitchen table, inhale the aroma of chicken curry, and listen into our family conversations. Feel outraged when we are demonized. Get emotionally involved in our issues. Get incensed when I had to deal with misogyny in the Muslim community. Rejoice when we built our first mosque, and get teary-eyed when my son fell in love. I wrote this because I don't want my children and my grandchildren to be afraid to say, I am a Muslim. Thank you for listening.